Kim, you set yourself quite the task when you were writing a piece for Review. You were looking at the Irish references in the Epstein files. And we know in the latest tranche of Epstein files, about 3 million documents were released. So you really did set yourself quite a task. How do you go about searching 3 million files? Are they on a database? Are they searchable? How do you go about it?
Well, it's a bit like going down a rabbit hole because they're not in any particular order on the website or catalogued or anything. So you have to just put in search, words like Irish, Ireland, and then some names, and it throws up sort of totally random selection of things from, the workings of Epstein's household, the fact that he liked Kerrygold Irish butter, that comes up, and then to meetings with people and business interests, that kind of thing.
And in terms of the tone that you picked up on when you were reading through these files, what did you make of that?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of it was fairly routine stuff, but then when they were talking particularly about women, there was this kind of frat boy, misogynistic tone. And bear in mind that this was after he'd been convicted. So within that group, within that elite group, if you like, that was still going on. It was still, someone sending him a message about meeting a busty Irish blonde and would he like to meet them, and that kind of thing.
Part of the problem, though, with that is that a lot of the names are redacted, so we don't really know the context necessarily or the reference.
Funnily enough, a lot of the names are redacted, but sometimes people are identifiable, like a Christian name of someone who was mentioned in that sort of sexist tone was mentioned in the file. And some of the references, there's sort of, again with that tone, there's sort of slightly Paddy the Irish tone to it, and a mention from one of his contacts of a visit to Ireland and going to the border, what's described as the future UK-Irish border, which is a bit of a misnomer because it was always that border, but around the time of Brexit. And this was at the time after he'd been convicted as well, and describing the women as being fat and horrible asses, if I can say that. And that might be something genetic from the potato famine. So that's the kind of level a lot of it was at.
Let's go into some of the people that you wrote about. So George Mitchell was somebody who came up in the files, obviously the chairman of the Good Friday Agreement. He's obviously and so massively associated with the peace process in Northern Ireland. What was his involvement with Epstein?
Well, it's clear that certainly at one time they were friends because George Mitchell contributed to his birthday book, his notorious birthday book, with all these this network sort of saying what a great guy he was. And Mitchell said that in the birthday book, his written contribution, that his friendship was a blessing. Now, there's a lot of controversy about to what extent Mitchell was involved with Epstein after the conviction. There's evidence in the files that there were attempts to contact each other, messages left, but whether they met as friends or on what terms they met. But there was an accusation made against George Mitchell by Virginia Giuffre, and who's one of the women one of the best known victim, perhaps, that Mitchell forced her to sleep with him or had sex with her, but that's fervently denied by Mitchell. I was in touch with a spokesperson who said it was a case of mistaken identity in a picture where he was identified in a picture and it was published, but it was a case of mistaken identity, and that was acknowledged by the publication. And he more or less said he didn't really have contact once he knew about the accusations.
Bertie Ahern said he doesn't see what George Mitchell is being accused of, I suppose.
Yeah, I mean, George Mitchell, obviously Queen's University dropped their the naming of their Peace Institute after him, and withdrew a statue, a bust of him. But Bertie Ahern didn't really see any substance in the contacts, evidence of substantial friendship after the accusation was made.
Our colleague Maeve Sheehan, she wrote a piece in the Sunday Independent there over the weekend about an Irish summit.
Yeah, this was an organisation called the Academy of Achievement, and Bertie Ahern actually spoke at that, and lots of well-known people, including Bono, Mikhail Gorbachev, Clinton, spoke at it, and Epstein attended it. But, you know, I'm sure Bertie Ahern probably didn't have any recollection of meeting him. It was well before he was convicted, you know. So, but it showed how the extent to which he was plugged into a global network of these well-known business and political figures. And he certainly visited Ireland a number, as far as we know, a number of times.
When it comes to Irish businesses mentioned, because I think quite a lot from your piece, what you said was that a lot of the Irish or the Ireland references is down to financial interest that Epstein might have had. So can you tell us about the references with Allied Irish Bank?
Yeah, that was emails going to and from Epstein about the potential for an investment in Anglo-Irish Bank. This was at a time when the banks had gone bust, and it was shortly after AIB went bust. And so there seemed to be a lot of interest with Epstein and his network in distressed Irish assets. And one of the things there was an interest in was the AIB property portfolio. Presumably they were trying to pick up these assets for cheap prices during the crash. And so a lot of the mentions, you know, really have little to do with the scandal. They're purely incidental. And say, for example, there's mention in an email of Dermot Desmond, but people point out that he didn't know Epstein at all. He had no contact with him. The investment didn't take place, but there was a potential for an investment in an island in Canouan in the Grenadines, and interest in distressed golf assets, you know. But there's no evidence that Dermot Desmond knew him or had any involvement. So a lot of these mentions are purely incidental. People find their names thrown up.
And it's an important point that you make, that people were mentioned in it not necessarily because they were the ones in contact with Epstein or any of his associates. Like you said, it's incidental. So it doesn't necessarily mean that an individual whose name has come up in these files have done anything wrong.
No, or even known Epstein at all.
Yeah. Meanwhile, he's not Irish, but he's a very familiar name to us in Ireland, and a notable figure as well in the peace process, Bill Clinton. What's the latest on him testifying as part of a congressional investigation?
Well, initially, he was called on by the Republicans to appear at this congressional investigation. Initially, both him and Hillary refused to appear, but then they were in danger of being in contempt or accused of contempt, and they agreed to appear. So, but Bill Clinton and Hillary hope that all their submissions, their testifying, will be in public, so that the Republicans don't just select samples from the investigation and release them.
I was reading an article by Marina Hyde in The Guardian in relation to what's going on over in the UK at the moment. And one of the things she notes is the New Statesman cover, which describes the Mandelson affair as the scandal of the century. But what she says is, guys, this isn't even the biggest scandal of the scandal. And basically she is bringing it back to the victims of Jeffrey Epstein and the trauma that they faced, because we're kind of going off on different tangents now, especially over in the UK, and calls for potentially Keir Starmer to step down. Do you think that that's happening, that we're kind of losing the worst of what the Epstein files show us?
Yeah, reading through the files, certainly the files that I read, you don't really get a sense of the trauma that these were young, very young women, and it was initially he almost got off with a rap on the knuckles virtually in sentencing terms, a very short sentence, but it then emerged that he was accused of a vast network of young women and underage girls that he was involved with in trafficking. But you don't really, those voices aren't really heard in the files that I came across anyway.
And Kim Bielenberg, thank you.